Where we're live, Chair.
There we go, the clock has ticked over 10 o'clock, so good morning everybody, and welcome to the October meeting of the Health, Social Care and Scrutiny Overview Committee. Before we start, I need to let you know that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Item 1, we have apologies for absence, and we have Tracy Huffer, and we've got Councillor Bentic who is substituting. Item 2, disclosable pecuniary interest. Is there anybody who needs to declare anything? Item 3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of July. The minutes have been circulated. Anybody got any issues with them? Happy to move them as read. Yep. Thank you. Item 3, we have public question time, none received. Item 5 is members' questions. We have none received, Amanda, that I'm aware of.
I believe that, Kate, you'll be raising your issues during the substantive agenda item this morning. So no.
Okay. Moving rapidly on item 6, update on the Joint Health and Overview Scrutiny Committee. Tom. Tom.
So we did have a meeting scheduled with the Joint Health Overview Scrutiny Committee for the 20th. That's been postponed and is just in the process of being rearranged for the 9th of November, I think, in Telford. The main agenda item on that meeting is likely to be the Ockenden progress updated report. And that's been again moved back from the 20th. And then we'll have another meeting of that committee scheduled on the 29th of November. And the items possibly for that meeting, one might be the report of the council's, or the task and finish group has been looking at urgent emergency care, or as we call it, ambulance response times. It's looking system-wide. And the other items may be the integrated care strategy, which is currently looking for a slot to get that in before Christmas. And depending on what gets covered on the 9th of November, possibly more on urgent and emergency care, because that's when the meeting was originally, or that topic was originally planned to come forward as well. So we don't have an update from an immediate or previous Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but there are 2 coming in the next month.
Thank you, Tom. And so to you for item 7 as well, just an update on the membership of Joint Host Co-op, please.
Thank you. So on the 11th of July, we came with the report to the committee about the options for co-optees. In particular, the 3 permanent co-optees that we have places for on the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So we have 3 Shropshire Council members and 3 co-opted members. We came with the proposal that we should have a co-optee from Health Watch Shropshire, a co-optee from the patient participation groups or patient groups, and a professional or expert co-optee as well. We went out to advert or asked for expressions of interest in August and September. We interviewed for the roles, or for 2 of the roles, on the 14th of October. As the Council's Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee here, we come to you with the 3 named co-optees, and we're looking for your confirmation and approval. The interview process for 2 of the roles did involve the 3 representatives members who sit on the Joint HOSC as well. So Councillor Charmley, Councillor Kidd and Councillor Halliday are involved. So whether they want to say anything as I go through, but Health Watch Shropshire's named co-optee is going to be Lynn Corley. Lynn's here today. She's the Chief Officer for Health Watch. The professional expert co-optee is David Sambach, and we have co-optee from the patient groups, who is a member of the Church Stretton patient group, and that is Louise Price. So what we're asking for is just confirmation really from you as the the parent and health overview scrutiny committee that you're happy with those 3 co-optees to join the 3 members on that committee.
Thank you, Tom. I think I should say that having sat through the interviews, the range of knowledge and expertise was encouraging. I think it will add value to the process of joint costs. So, can we just have a show of hands that everyone's happy with the appointments? So, thank you.
Chair, would it be possible for people to just speak up slightly? It's a little bit hard.
Yeah, we can do. Thank you. So moving on to item 8, Shrewsbury Health Wellbeing Hub. So I'll hand over to Gareth and Jackie. I don't know if you're related or if it's just the floor is yours.
Thank you.
We'll take questions afterwards, so press the right hand button.
Right. So good morning. I am Gareth Robinson. I'm the Director of Delivery and Transformation for NHS, Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. And Jackie is...
I'm the Associate Director for Communications and Engagements, and we're not related.
No, and nor are we related to Rachel. So thank you for the opportunity to walk through what has happened since the last time we were able to update the committee on the Shrewsbury Health and Wellbeing Hub. There was a lot of content which reflects a huge amount of progress over the last few months. So what I'll do, with your permission, Chair, is to walk through the slides that we've got. I'll probably canter through them quite quickly because I guess there's an awful lot of questions and topics that people want to go through. But if we get to a point that you want to investigate in further detail, then please do just recognise I'm just trying to cover a lot of ground quite quickly. Thank you, Amanda. What we will do is walk through some feedback issues. This information that I'm going to take you through on the feedback has been shared previously in the public domain in the Town Council meeting a number of weeks ago now. We'll also go through some details of the engagement process that we've been through and continue to go through. We're conscious of the concerns that have been raised about the level of engagement, so I think it'd be helpful just to refresh where we are on that. Then the detail of what has changed since we last had the opportunity to update HASC, particularly in terms of the options development and options appraisals. And then we'll walk through where we are in terms of the site options, which is again at the heart of some of the concerns of our citizens. And I'll wrap up with next steps and some timelines. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly walk through this. So there are 4 main areas of feedback that have been provided to us. The first is around the lack of information in relation to other options, which we'll come on to as part of this update. The preferred site at Otley Road, again, I'll go through that in a little bit more detail shortly. A lack of information and transparency around decision making. The next section will cover that off in some detail. And when is the formal consultation going to start and what's to be consulted on? And that's where I'll conclude. As I said, the lack of information in relation to other options in Shrewsbury was a concern. The programme team are now working with the stakeholder reference group, and I know some of you will be part of that reference group, to develop and evaluate other options. A long list of 14 options have been identified from earlier public engagement, which include the do nothing option, they include the Cavell Hub option, and almost every scenario in between in terms of extending the existing buildings, 6 new builds or different configurations of the existing structures. And the presentation and evaluation of these options was shared with the stakeholder reference group on the 6th of October. We were also conscious of the amount of detail we walked through on the 6th of October. There was an awful lot of content in that session. So we repeated that reference group last week. I forget the exact date, but it gave people an opportunity, members of the reference group, an opportunity to comment once, reflect on the information, and then come back and comment again. We've also had feedback to say that the preferred site at Otley Road and the patient ability to get to it is a particular concern. I think we've recognised and heard that quite openly, and the programme is now reviewing all previous site options and actually revisiting additional site locations. For members that were also at the Town Council meeting 4 weeks ago now, we also made the open offer that if any member of the public, if any citizen is aware of sites that we wouldn't pick up through our usual processes working with the council, with the state agent, for them to come forwards. And we are currently working through those potential site locations. What's worth underlining is that the Otley Road site remains the preferred option. It is the preferred option, but it's not the concluded option. And I know that the difference can actually sometimes be quite unsettling. If it was a concluded option and there was no transport assessment work or integrated impact assessment, I could really understand the concerns and the anxieties that patients and citizens have. But at the moment, we're still working through that process, and we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. You've said that there's a lack of information and transparency on decision making, particularly in the early stages of the project. I don't think this will be the first time I've acknowledged that. I think I've been quite happy to stand up and put our hands up and say, for many different reasons, some of them to do with the kind of information that we are permitted to share at early stages of a planning process of this nature. We maybe have not been able to share as much information as we would like. We hold our hands up to that. To recognise that, we are effectively working through every step of the process with partners. We're going through the options appraisal and site location review again. And the stakeholder reference group has, I'd say, established on the slide, but I think has been supercharged to make sure that the engagement of multiple stakeholders in the process is enhanced. And the programme of community engagement does continue, which I will refer to on one of my next slides. The stakeholder reference group that I've described, this is a group of representatives, and these are listed on the slide. I won't walk through them all, but you'll see representatives of patient participation groups, councillors, and a number of different stakeholders, where we test our options appraisal, our options with people with an insight into the hub development process, and engage with the reference group to gain insight and influence the way forwards. That reference group has now met on a number of occasions and will continue to meet through the process, and is a key aspect of the way that we will engage with citizens, on top of on top of a range of other engagement mechanisms, not least attendance here today. In terms of the engagement timeline, that is quite small actually. The key thing really is around the history of engagement through 2021 and 20. Oh, thank you, Amanda. Magic. Through 2021 and 2022 is early engagement and communication. It is not formal consultation, and I think it's really important to underline. As we go through the formative stages of the programme development, we are seeking to engage and involve patients and citizens as much as we can. But the formal consultation, which is at the heart of an awful lot of the concern around the process, won't commence until spring 2023, when we're actually at the stage of formal options that can go forward. I won't walk through the detail on there. It's in the slide back. I'm sure you've had an opportunity to look at that. Next slide, please. So just a recap of the engagement to date, and really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is to put on record the emphasis that we've placed on engaging with our relevant stakeholders, just as a reminder to us all. The listening exercise, almost 1,300 responses were received. I think that number has been at the heart of some consternation around how much that really represents a solid engagement. It's 1,300 responses over a population base of about 40,000 patients that have been to be affected by this proposal. And there's a number of ways you can look at that. Ordinarily, for an exercise of this type, anything over 1% response rate is generally seen as quite a positive response from your citizens. We can't force people to respond, but anything above 1% is seen as the kind of the entry level of what you would expect to receive. 1,300 represents about 2.5%. I mean, we would love feedback from every single member of the patient group, of course, but 2.5% is significant enough for us to accept as relevant. And we've been enhancing that through other access points into our patients, such as the patient participation groups. The key themes that were expressed were the ability to book appointments, a high quality of care and good access. And those themes have been played out as part of the discussions we've gone on. Next slide, Amanda. Through May and July of this year, we've then been working on the case for change. And we held a number of focus groups with GP surgery staff and community organisations, where we were asking participants to help us understand the experience of their general practice, what they thought about the aims and the benefits of the hub, and crucially, what services they would like to see in the hub. This development is around two things. it's around the co-location. Choose those words really carefully. It's not about merger. It's co-location of existing GP practices and building additional services around those GP practices. And the purpose of the focus groups is to better understand from our patients what services they would like to see within that hub. Next slide, please, Amanda. Again, I won't walk through the detail of this slide. I've had an opportunity to read it. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is the emphasis we've played on really accelerating the engagement activity since the last task, as with engagement meetings, patient participation groups, attendance at the town council, publication of the project initiation document, and a number of other updates on social media. So we've heard that feedback around needing more involvement, more information being shared, and I hope that we've demonstrated over the course of the last couple of months that has really changed the paper. Then to the question of what patients have and can influence. The public and patients have influenced the long list of options of scenarios other than the hub. So where we've got the Cavell hub, what other options are available in terms of existing estate or extension? They've also influenced the long list of potential sites. We've actually had two really interesting sites that have been proposed by the public, which potentially weren't on the list. So that's been really helpful and will contribute to our site fund going forwards. And they will influence or have influenced the potential future service model. That is work that will continue as we go forwards. But that's around what kind of services, whether it's mental health, children's, other community services, could be co-located with a hub model. Public and patients will influence the service model and configuration. As I've said, that is work that will continue, and that's the crucial aspect of what patients will get an opportunity to influence. And they will be technical decisions. Public and patients won't have the ability to influence the final site option because the site option appraisal needs to be carried out on technical criteria around whether the site is actually physically big enough, whether there are any covenants on it, all of the aspects you'd expect of the technical criteria. That results in the fact that the patients may not have the opportunity to influence the actual site location because that is effectively outside of the gift of their control.
You want questions at the end, or?
I'm happy to take as we go along, or chair them.
Yeah, we'll do it at the end, Gerald.
Yeah, next slide. Okay, so the options other than the hub. This is the crux of how we end up at the hub model. Being really clear about process. We are required to follow what's called the HM Treasury Green Book process on appraisal and evaluation. That is something that is mandated for public service, not specific to the NHS, and it's a way that all public services follow business case process. Within that, 9 essential criteria are identified against which you have to assess all options going forward for your model of care. Within that process, we therefore identified the options that we discussed around doing nothing, around reconfiguring the existing estate, the Cavell hub, multiple Cavell hubs, and we ended up with 14 scenarios that we're potentially able to take them forward. And then we reviewed those against those essential criteria, and I think the next slide sets out what those essential criteria are. Again, you'll have had a chance to look at this, so I won't dwell on these for too long, but you would expect the criteria to be, as you see on here, around patient choice, patient access, the proposal value for money, do we have the workforce delivery, and so on. So those are the criteria that we were assessing all of the scenarios on. So again, those scenarios weren't necessarily the site location, but they were the Cavell hub. Do we maintain our existing practices? Do we do something different with the existing practices? We assessed all of those against these criteria. And the outcome of that, which we shared, and have now shared with the stakeholder reference group on 2 occasions, is on the next slide. And what you'll see is the options are down the left-hand side. So do nothing, 6 individual new builds, 3 new builds, or the Cavell hub. The only option that was able to comply with all of the essential criteria was the new build of a single site for Shrewsbury Health and Wellbeing Hub. And you'll see on the table there, you'll see within the site pack that's been issued, that it was the only option that met all of the criteria. Crucially, you'll see that most of the options were ruled out based on a value for money basis. And we cannot hide away from the fact that the funding route for this is critical to our ability to build capacity within our primary care services. So that resulted in the only option being able to be taken forward in terms of this impact on the 6 practices in Shrewsbury was the new build of the Cabell Hub. That's a really crucial step for this process, and it's worth just lingering on that for a second. So, if we just go back to the green and red slide for a second. So what that means is a crucial decision point for the hub. It means that the only option that we can take forward because of the financial context that we're operating within is the hub. And at that point, we then need to go to the next set of options. So what does that mean in terms of the site? So for us to take forward the Cabell hub option, we then look at the sites. There was significant concern raised over the summer around the site of the Otley Road location. And based on that feedback, we've opened up the site options appraisal process again, referred to that previously. And that probably then takes us forward a couple of slides, Amanda. So as I said, the Otley Road was a preferred site. There was some feedback around the questioning the access arrangements around that. So we have therefore commenced a reappraisal of the site options, looking at the original 9 sites that were part of the options appraisal process early on in the year, and extended that with new locations that are being offered by Shropshire Council or by the general public. And that appraisal process is currently underway. We're going from a long list to a short list. The long list to short list is effectively a binary. Do those site locations fit the basic requirements of the hub? So, for example, I could have easily have offered my back garden, but that would have been ruled out purely based on size. So a number of the options will be ruled out on size, others will be on access, geographical access, sorry, not geographical, logistical access, covenant, historical issues, whether it's likely for the site to be sold, to be able to be procured. So that will then get us down to a shortlist, and we will then work with colleagues from Shropshire Council to work through the shortlist to identify a preferred option. That's work that is currently underway. And I think the next slide just takes us through that in a little bit more detail. In fact, I've just jumped across that. So the stage 1 is taking the long list to a short list, effectively using those questions. Does the site meet the minimum area requirement? Will the land be available? And are there any significant site constraints? So, for example, if we chose the showground, that would be instantly ruled out because of its flooding issues. Then the technical criteria to prioritise the shortlist to identify a preferred option is as set out on this slide. Again, I won't go through the detail. You've had an opportunity to read that, but they are the criteria that you would expect to see in concluding us, allowing us to draw a conclusion to a preferred site option. You will see the third bullet there around the site being easily accessible, which is I suspect something we'll come back to. Okay, next slide. These are further criteria, and again, I'd draw your attention to the pack. You can walk through the detail as you wish. So in terms of next steps, how we take that forward. So as I've said, that site options appraisal process is currently underway. Between now and December, we're meeting with all of the patient participation groups and all of the practices. We've completed 3 now. It's been really interesting to see the content of those patient participation groups, with the opportunity, I think, to work through the detail a little bit more and listen to the GP lived experience. I think that's changed the tone of the conversation quite extensively. We've had 2 stakeholder reference group meetings, and we've got 2 more scheduled for November and December. And then there's a range of interaction with local community groups as well. Now, in terms of the public consultation, the next slide will describe a full consultation starting likely to be March or April based on current timelines. That was scheduled to be November. We took a really positive, conscious decision to pause that until March or April to allow the revisit of the options appraisal processes in respect of the feedback we received from councillors and from the public in terms of the progress to date. Prior to that, we need to complete an integrated impact assessment, and that will specifically include the travel impact on any option going forward to formal consultation. We will walk that through NHS STW's, Shropshire South Regions Equality and Involvement Committee. We'll then complete a pre-consultation business case, and we'll prepare a communication and engagement strategy and operational plan. All of these are prerequisites of getting to formal consultation and are good practice in terms of the process of a consultation exercise. And we'll use the integrated assessment, again, specifically including the travel impact, to further inform stakeholder engagement with groups to identify the potential equality issues. So one of the things that screams loudly to us is if we do move six GP hubs into one location, there will undoubtedly be an impact on specific patient groups, and we need to fully understand that and work closely with patients and citizens to make sure we manage that process as well as we can. As I said, the anticipated start dates March or April for formal consultation. That will take 8 weeks, and again, in line with good practice, there'll be a midpoint review through that to assess the reach, response rates, and gaps, and so on. And this will help us to undertake further targeted work if there are gaps in the formal consultation process. The consultation will be on the potential future service model and configuration of services co-locating with the 6 practices. We aren't actually required to go to formal consultation for the movement of a GP practice. An individual business, that's not technically described as a major service change, but we are required to go to consultation around a service model that will wrap around those. And we will ensure that we'll involve service users, carers, and representatives from all aspects of citizens and patients to allow them the opportunity to consider the proposal while it remains at a formative stage. It's a really important aspect. All of the work that we're doing at the moment to engage and involve is crucial to allowing patients and citizens an opportunity to be involved as we form our proposal. That's the pre-work that goes into before a formal consultation. And I think that may actually conclude my rapid canter through. This is vomit on a page. Forgive me for this. There's a lot of detail in here, but what this effectively describes is the process that we are going to go through. I think it's a lot easier for you to read inside your pack. But what it describes in the top line are the comms and engagement steps that we will go through, and identifies where we are in the options process. The technical programme, which is where we are very, very early on in the options development process, and the technical, the build stage, if you like. And again, we're right at the outset of that. The reason why I underline the line we're right at the outset of many aspects of this is because I do believe that an awful lot of concern and anxiety around the hub is driven by the belief that decisions have been taken that have not yet been taken. So we don't yet know what the location may well be. We don't yet know what services will be included within a hub should it be taken forwards. And all of these will be aspects of the proposal we'll work in conjunction with you on. And I think I'll pause for breath, having quickly run through that. I hope that was at the appropriate pace just to work through it quickly, with an opportunity to now raise questions.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. I don't know who's hand up. Chris, I think you had first. Then we'll go Bernie, Kate.
Thank you, Chair.
Around a bit.
I have 2 questions. I reckon everybody. Can I ask about the terms of the funding for the proposed hub? Is funding restricted to a single site, or can it be used for the multiple site option? That's my first question. My second question is, are there any examples of a health and wellbeing hub working anywhere else, either successfully or not?
So thank you, Councillor Schofield. So on the multiple site question around funding, we have previously worked with NHS England to be really clear around what our options are, and NHS England has been clear back to say the funding of the Cavell programme is for a single site option within Shrewsbury. As a little bit of extra context, it is a national pilot programme, and funding has been allocated to 6 healthcare systems, Shrewsbury being one, for us to take forward. We have asked previously, and following the town council meeting where a number of councillors asked us to raise the matter again, and subsequently raised with NHS England whether a a multiple site option is available, and the clear answer is no, it is a single site option. We will continue to work with NHS England to see if there are other options, but the reality is that this is a prescribed way of deploying the funding. In terms of the examples of the hub, this will be the first example of this type of hub. And what I mean by that, there's two ways of looking at this. There's the physical nature of co-locating services, and there are multiple examples of that. So I worked with some in Walsall, and my colleague Simon Whitehouse, Chief Exec, was actually responsible for delivering some of these in Crewe and Nantwich. There's some in Manchester. Following the exact same question from the town council meeting, we're pulling together a little case study, like a portfolio of information on that, and we'll share that with the public once we just finalise the work in that area. That my colleague Rachel, I think, is behind me, is pulling that together as we speak, to give an example of where that has worked in the past. But the crucial issue isn't necessarily the co-location. The crucial issue is what this means for the GP practices that will be co-located within the hub. And this is at the heart of what a Cabell Hub is about. Where we are at the moment with GP funding is, I think broadly, the vast majority of all GP practices within the UK are individual businesses. So certainly 6 practices that we're concerned here have different arrangements around how they own or hire, lease their existing property. And that takes a huge amount of effort and resource. Not only they're running their clinical services, but they're running their estate and their business as well. And what that means for those that are there is they're used to that. They've kind of done that. That's how GPs came into the service over the last 10, 20, 30 years. But it's a real barrier to recruitment for us. So at the moment, for example, if I was a new GP, I wish I was 35 and I was at the start of my career rather than towards the end, and I wanted to become a partner in a practice, I have to buy into that business. I'm at 35, I've got newborn kids, I'm looking at a mortgage, and I've got to find substantial investment to buy into a business. That's a genuine barrier to recruitment. 20, 30, 40 years ago, actually that's part of the way that GPs really came into providing service, but now it's changed. And the employment market is wholly different, and we're finding it really difficult to recruit GPs. What we're doing with this hub is taking that problem away. The hub will be owned by the NHS and will effectively open the door and say, GPs, please come and work in this building. We will take away the financial risk of them having to own their own buildings. We'll take away the estate management issue. We'll take away the legacy estate issues, and GPs will be able to literally turn up, open the door, walk in and work. And that's really important in terms of our recruitment and retention issues. Of the 6 practices, I think I can be pretty confident to say that, I don't know which ones, but if we were sat here in 10 years and did nothing, I don't think those 6 practices would all be there. And what we would then be doing then is have to think through, well, what does that mean for local primary care provision? And what we might find is 1 or 2 of the GP practices might say, I'm not interested in this anymore. I can't find new GPs. I'm going to hand the list back to the NHS, and then the NHS as a whole would have to work out what we do with that. The use of the hub allows us to move away from that model and allows us to have a much easier way to recruit and retain GPs into our local system. And that's what's really important. It is important around the co-location of the services and the models that might give a better standard of care, but crucially it's about making sure we can recruit and retain GPs into the structure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Bernie, Councillor Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my belief at this point that this radical experiment in the delivery of healthcare to 45,000 Shrewsbury patients is illegal in its present form, as none of the other currently funded models of delivery of primary care have been seriously considered, and the project does not conform to the 4 gunning principles, which are that proposals are still at a formative stage, but the health hub was the only option that was considered, and there are references to this going back to December 2020 and probably earlier than that. Sufficient information to give intelligent consideration, but the project initiation document, which was constructed in February 2021, was only released following public outcry in September 2022, at around the time of the Shrewsbury Town Council meeting to consider this. there is adequate time for consideration and response. Because all of the documents are not in the public domain, it is doubted that this will be possible. And conscientious consideration must be given to the consultation responses before a decision is made. Now, in that engagement exercise, 40% of patients who responded to the engagement process, which was principally online, and those who engaged by telephone, 40% of those patients walked to their current surgery. And these were people mostly using IT, not those who are elderly, frail, and who do not have access to transport. And so these four gunning principles have not been followed. And so my conclusion is that this process is illegal and requires a judicial review. I wrote to Mr. Robinson on the 20th of October 2022, and have not so far had a response. In it, I suggested that the ICS was pursuing a policy of platitudes in response to well-considered alternative options to resolve the current primary care crisis in Shrewsbury. I asked him to confirm that he will not consider or take to the NHS E&I any alternative proposal other than the 6 GP surgeries moving entirely into the Cavell Health Hub. That is, no options to consider some of the surgeries staying in their current site. I also asked him for the evidence that he had made any material changes whatsoever, apart from considering a change of site, to the plans as a result of the thunder of public opinion screaming its opposition at moving practice premises for 45,000 patients from local walkable sites to a huge remote edifice, which is by far the biggest example of this unproven radical experiment in primary care. I'd like to address some of the issues with regard to funding and options. And so in March 2020, the National Association of Primary Care, NAPC, published a publication called Primary Care Networks, Critical Thinking in Developing an Estate Strategy, using a primary care home model from 2015. There are now 240 of these, none of whom are Cavell Health Hubs, across England, representing 11 million patients and 1/5 of England's healthcare system. And so clearly there are a number of options which are possible. With regard to trying to attract GPs in February 2020, the General Practitioners Committee for England announced a £94 million pot to cover recruitment and retention, with £20,000 one-off incentive for new partners, 100% reimbursement for all additional staff, and £137 million for primary care networks to employ a broader range of professionals. And so, where has this money gone? The government established the Primary Care Infrastructure Fund in 2014 to accelerate improvements in general practice premises and infrastructure, including a multi-million estates and technology transformation fund to modernise infrastructure and facilities, which was launched in 2015-16 and closed in 2017-18. Where is Shropshire's and the Shrewsbury GP's practices bids for this money? There was an NHS England and Improvement General Practice Premises Review in June 2019. Only 2 in 10 premises were fit for the future. And yet we're being told that the Cavell Hub is the only option, when clearly most of the other practices are considering other options. In that publication, 6 different funding models were discussed and supported and are available moving into the future. So how is it possible that the only option is a Cavell Health Hub? I suggest that this is not the case. The Shrewsbury Health Hub has been presented to 45,000 patients as the only viable model for their GP services. I'm afraid I would say that this is simply untrue. Preparations have been made before 2020 when Shropshire's clinical commissioning group documents referred to this experimental model. The public was only involved in August and September 2021, a year after this, when media releases and principally online engagement was commenced. And in that engagement, which was mostly online or by telephone, only 1 in 4 supported the Health Hub, and 4 in 10 walked to their current surgery. A much higher proportion of those using the surgery most using those surgeries, that is the elderly, the frail, those without transport, are likely to walk. And so these have not been included in the engagement process, and there is an urgent need for them to be so. Following the motion at Shrewsbury Town Council in November 2021, Shropshire CCG came to the council in January 2022 and admitted significant mistakes in engagement. Yet it took a public meeting in September 2022 before the CCG successor, that is the Integrated Care System, published its project initiation document, which was originally submitted to NHS England and Improvement in February 2021, over a year earlier. Only one option was considered at that point, a Cavell Health Hub, the largest in England, and then involving 65,000 patients. And so I'm afraid that it is my belief that this project does not fit the Gunning principles relating to significant changes in the delivery of healthcare, and so I would request a judicial review. While we're waiting for this, would the Integrated Care System please release all documents around decision-making on this project, including the decisions log, and provide detailed assessment of the other options, including the weighting used and the cost estimates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bentek. I'm not sure I agree with everything you said, but over to Gareth to push back, I guess, and answer some of the questions.
Yeah, pushback's probably not the term, but as you say, answer. Councillor Bentek, there's a number of questions. What I'll do is I'll work through the things that I've captured. If I haven't answered all of the questions, then please do. Oh, sorry.
No. Sorry. You don't want me coughing.
Could you just get the microphone a bit closer to
Of course. Sorry.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Let's deal with the legality question first. Gunning has 4 principles. The first principle is that the consultation must be at a time when proposals are still at a formative stage. We've taken legal advice against that, and our legal advice is consistent with the fact that we have involved the public in the development of the proposal at a formative stage. So our legal advice is really clear that we're consistent with the Gunning Principle 1. Gunning Principle 2 is that there is sufficient information to give intelligent consideration, and that will be part of the consultation documents that will be produced during March and April, and that will ensure that we're consistent with Gunning Principle 2. Gunning Principle 3 is that there is adequate time for consideration and response. We have an 8-week consultation planned, and that is in line with best practice guidance. And Gunning 4 is that conscientious consideration must be given to the consultation responses before a decision is made, and this will obviously be part of the consultation process. So to date, Guiding Principle 1 is the key issue for us. We've taken legal advice, and the legal advice is providing us with significant assurance that we are compliant. Guiding Principles 2, 3 and 4 will be picked up during the formal consultation process. In terms of the transport areas or the transport issues that you raised, Councillor Bentic, I completely agree. Access is going to be right at the heart of how we handle the deployment of a successful hub.
So could you speak up?
Oh,
Just a bit,
think of
or
me,
into the
sorry,
microphone?
yeah. Access will be at the heart of the success of this hub. But access isn't just about geographical access and the ability for a patient to be able to walk to the hub. It's got a number of components. The first one is we are not comparing the potential hub with the GP practices that we currently have. We're comparing a successful hub with the GP services of the future. And I've just previously described that they are at risk. If we're not able to provide an alternative way of recruiting and retaining staff, then we will not be able to guarantee the services as we currently see them. It's not also comparing the hub with the 6 existing practices, it's comparing the patient experience. So, for example, I might turn up, I'm not anymore, but I used to be Belvedere Medical Practice when I was in short trousers. And I might turn up to Belvedere Medical Practice for my GP appointment. But the current way that services work, because all of the GP practices are dispersed and the services that wrap around primary care are dispersed, then I might go in and maybe as a 15-year-old, I might not have had hip pain, but I might go in with a bit of hip pain. And the GP would say, yeah, I need a bit more information on that. I need to better understand that. So I'm going to send you to the hospital for some form of diagnostic procedure or diagnostic event. And then once you've been to the hospital, I might send you to the physio, the first contact physio. But the first contact physio doesn't actually work at Belvedere Medical Practice. They might work at Marysville. So my experience might be from Belvedere to the hospital to Marysville and then back to the GP. In the hub, that will be different. Now, I can't guarantee a simple open access, you turn up on a Tuesday and have all of those in one go, but they will all be much more easily configured into one place of access, and potentially can be scheduled to be much more convenient to the individual patient. And then it's access to staff. You raised the point, Councillor Bentic, about the additional funding for staff. We have had, as part of those schemes that you described, funding for 200 non-GP roles into the system recently, and we've only been able to recruit into about 150 of them. Part of that is to do with the way that the services are currently configured. Part of that is to do with the rooms that are available. So, those of you at the Town Council meeting on a number of weeks ago, I forget which day now, Dr. Jackson stood up and very, very powerfully described the fact that we were not able to find a home for 20 new trainee GPs because there was physically not enough estate for them to have a place for them to be recruited into. That's 20 GPs that I'm not saying that the hub would be the answer to, but would be a significant step forward in being able to build capacity. I've got 2 other notes here. Second, the 10th, fit for the future. Councillor Bentic, I can't recall what that question was. So I've got a note here, the 2nd of October, fit for the future.
There was a one of the documents on estates being fit for the future.
Okay, was that a PID?
But I mean, the main questions were would you confirm that you would not consider or take to NHS England an improvement any alternative proposal other than the 6 GP surgeries moving entirely into the Cavell Health Hub? In other words, will you consider an option that maintains a footprint within the local practice areas under consideration to assist those who are unable to travel the significant journey? For example, those in Baston Hill have to go right across the A5 with no good public transport to get to a site in Oakley Road. Where is the local service for them?
Okay, so in the same way as I can't rule things in terms of the travel impact assessment work that we will do, what I can't do is rule things out. What we will do as part of any proposal is try and have as big an impact on those challenges as possible. As some of the changes will bring an improvement in access, as I've described in terms of the co-location of services. Some of them will make it more difficult. And as part of the consultation process, part of the options appraisal process, We will carry out that integrated impact assessment. We'll understand the transport impacts and we'll do what we can to mitigate those as far as we can. But until we know the location, we can't really work those up. So I think it's part of the process and really have to come back and work with the committee on that. Once we understand the location, then we can get into the detail of what transport plans we can get in to support that.
I'm sorry, but one of the options that we've asked you to consider is maintaining some presence, some footprint on existing locations. And it seems that you're not prepared to consider that as an option. I'm not suggesting it may be an all singing, all dancing surgery at each one.
So I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. I think when I say I'm not prepared to rule anything out, what I'm not going to sit here and say is it will be the hub and nothing else. I think we've got to be creative in exactly the way you're describing around how we can make services accessible. Until we know the site location, I can't do the detailed workup of what those will be. But if there are ways of allowing us to leave services in certain places, then we'll look into that. They need to be affordable. They need to be deliverable. But I'm really open to looking into those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Kate next.
Thank you. Can people hear me at the back there? Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks for the presentation. Just building on some of the points that Councillor Bentinck has made. Some of my concerns are around actually the information that we've given us so far in terms of whether it's fair and whether it's evidence-based. And so, I mean, by your own admission, the case for change has been built upon the listening exercise, which you accept that, you know, could have been better. I think I want to focus back on transport, which you perhaps won't be surprised to hear. I think that Shropshire Council have made it clear that they're not going to fund bus services or public transport to the preferred site if there's no access already. Preferred site being on Otley Road, that means the vast majority of the patients, 45,000 patients, won't have access to public transport to get to that site. And the ICS, you have confirmed that you won't fund that transport either. Now, around, I've been at meetings which have suggested, oh, well, only 5% need to get public transport in the survey that we recently did, but that's obviously going to increase dramatically if people are having to travel further. And in terms of, I mean, the thing that really worries me is that number 2 on your principal, Cavill Centre principle is a community hub that addresses health inequalities. And maybe lots of people will be able to drive to the new hub if it goes ahead. But the people who you really need to get there if you want to address health inequalities are going to be the people who don't have cars. And around 1/3 of households in the bottom income quintile lack access to a car, which is 7 times higher than those households in the top quintile. So I think that, you know, one of your principal aims with the hub is seriously at risk if we don't have good transport to the hub. Thank you for your honesty. One of the things I found frustrating is that the hub has been dressed up as this one-stop shop, and thank you for your honesty, but, you know, because I think at times it's been thought that you can turn up and you will get several appointments at the same time. And as somebody who's worked from primary care for a couple of decades, it's almost impossible to book people in to other practitioners, and that might be wasteful of the time if practitioners are sitting with an empty appointment book, and just waiting for someone to be booked in. But that then does mean that people are going to have to travel much further. I mean, in your case for change, one of the reasons you're promoting this is because it will be reduced travel costs for patients and travel costs to the organisation. I suspect the latter will be true, but I mean, I think that's infactual. I don't think there are going to be reduced travel costs for patients. I think they're going to escalate. In the PID, the project initiation, document, on the short list of sites, the criteria includes to be easily accessible by public transport. And one of the things that worries me about what you said today and in a previous meeting that I was at, that you're now beginning to talk about access being in a broader sense, which I think means access to appointments. And I feel that the public transport, having been the heart of the PID, and the case for change is beginning to slip off the agenda, and you are preparing us to not have public transport. And let's hope you find another site. But you know, at the moment, your preferred site is a site without public access. The PID also says where people do not have their own transport, this is a direct quote from the PID, where people do not have their own transport, this could create health inequalities, backing up the point I made earlier. I'd just like to move on as well to the case for change. The main stock is either, and we're talking about the estates now, the buildings, the main stock is either no longer fit to develop modern healthcare services, or there's insufficient space to meet future demand, and no option to extend outwards or upwards. Now, I suspect there's a couple of these GP practices in real trouble. You know, I suspect for a variety of reasons. We don't have full access to that, I think, probably because of commercial sensitivity. But quite a few of them do have the ability to extend. They've been honest about that in the PID. And as Councillor Bentinck points out, why is it suddenly that these 6 surgeries who all formed a company and joined a company around a year before this process began are all at risk suddenly of potentially closing and not being able to operate? Why is that not happening in the rest of Shropshire and the rest of the country? Pulse Today, which is a GP magazine, as I'm sure you're aware, has recently published data on why GP practices close. And they've examined 474 practices across the UK who've closed in the last year. The percentage of practices who closed because of inadequate premises was 4%. So I'm finding it difficult to understand that this is going to really mean that we no longer have services in fit for practice in Shrewsbury. I think the recruitment and retention argument is difficult. I don't think there's any evidence that a new building will actually improve recruitment. I think it might. I think you should list that as a hope, but at the moment it's listed as a reason. And I struggle with that because I don't think that's factual, actually. I think it's untested. And yet the public are being told this is the only way we'll keep GPs. In fact, I think, you know, that there's at least one GP surgery. The PID reads like a resignation letter that all the 3 GPs want to retire. And as soon as their building is sold, I suspect that's what will happen. So we might actually see a reduction in GPs as a result of this. We're being told that patients can access healthcare appointments more quickly. There's no extra funding for GPs. So again, I think there are a number of issues within your documents that are potentially misleading and perhaps distorting the arguments for change. What I would just like to say, I mean, I put forward a question to Cabinet asking for consideration of funding for a judicial review, or legal advice at least, rather than judicial review. I'm not a lawyer, but I do think there's enough here, building on what Councillor Bentinck has said, to suggest that this might not be straightforward. And so I have put forward a request to Shropshire Council to look at some legal advice on this. And I would also like to ask, I mean, I have raised this a couple of times. We've been told that we can't have 2 hubs, Cavell hubs. I was told, however, we could have a smaller Cavell hub. And I would like to ask that that is included within the options. Most of these GP surgeries aren't about to close. Perhaps a couple are, I don't know. a smaller hub, we could maintain benefits of the investment, which I don't deny. There's a lot to like about some of this. It would take the pressure off the existing surgeries, and it would allow extra space for the things that I think everybody would like. So I have asked a couple of times. I've been told that a smaller hub is an option. All the other pilots have gone for much smaller hubs. I feel we're going too far, too fast, to be honest with this. I think it's a massive change. And so that is my request. And the GP surgeries seem to have been given a lot of leeway. Some of them have been pulled out. I'd love to know why. I'd love to know the reason why those two GP surgeries pulled out of this amazing opportunity. And I would ask that you give the public a similar level of say in this, and actually consider. I mean, this is massively unpopular. You know, there's a handful of people who might like the idea of it, but it is massively unpopular. We've never had a town council meeting with that number of people turn up. And I would ask that you look at what the public want as well as what the GP businesses.
Thank you, Kate. Gav, can I come back to you?
Yeah, again, there's a number of issues in there, and thank you, Councillor Halliday. I think from my perspective, I think language is really important here. And one of the things I want to highlight is that, given the public domain here, not all of these GP practices are at risk of instantly closing. I want to be really clear, and if I'm giving that impression in my choice of language, definitely do not want that to be the case. But what has been offered to our GPs is the opportunity to co-locate. And 6 of the 8 practices within the primary care network have taken that offer for a number of different reasons, and each will have their own individual reason. And given the opportunity to maintain their existing service within the constraints of their estate, within the constraints of their recruitment, within the constraints of their list growth size, and a number of different factors, they've said, the 6 of the 8 have said, based on these factors, actually we see the future of our GP practice in a co-located building somewhere else because of all of the things it means to us and our patients. 2 have chosen not to. Now, you'll forgive me, I've only really been in post for 4 or 5 months, so I couldn't give you an complete knowledge of each of those reasons. I think it's entirely reasonable I go away and do a bit more digging on that and come back. But in many ways, it doesn't matter. What is important is that the GPs themselves have chosen that the Cavell Hub option is better for them and their patients. And I was really struck by 2 patient participation groups, the Marden and Claremont Bank, where the GPs sat in a room face to face with their patients and described the ability that they feel this option has to maintain that family doctor relationship with their patients. And that really struck with me in a way that I probably hadn't been prepared for. Matthew and Carla, the 2 GPs concerned, were saying that they genuinely feel that if they don't move into an environment where they can bring more GPs into their practice, then list sizes are going to get bigger, and that personal relationship with their patients is going to be lost. Now, to your point, Councillor Halliday, I can't tell you that's fact. I can't tell you whether it is right or it is wrong. But based on the experience of our GPs and all of the things that we know within the NHS, that's the direction of travel they are fearful of if they don't take action. And the Cavell Hub is one potential route out. And I think that more than anything is why the GPs are really keen to be behind this, so that they can maintain that individual relationship with their patients. Some people, me, I kind of don't mind, to be honest. If I can pick up the phone and speak to a GP, I don't mind whether it's GP X, Y, or Z. But for some, and probably the ones that we're describing in terms of the patients with the most difficult access issues, they probably still want that local relationship more than anything. And that is part of the reason why we're doing this. Again, to your point, I can't promise you, I can't say that's fact, but our GPs are using that as part of their logic as to why they think this is right. Now, there won't be a list of, of things we can tick off that says for these practices it's this, for those practices it's that. But 6 have been given the opportunity, and 6 have chosen, based on what they think is for the best interest of them and their patients, to go into this model. Now, I can go away and I can absolutely work with GP practices to see if there is a smaller option that's available to us. But that'd be really difficult to develop as well, because if we've got 6 that want to be involved, how do we make the choice about which 3 or which 4? And that would be a really difficult process to go through. But I can absolutely go away and have that discussion with our GP, no problem. In terms of reduced travel, again, it's right at the heart of this. But until we know the location, it's really difficult for me to say what I can do and what I can't do as part of the development. The council being really clear that there'll be no funding for bus services. Actually, I haven't been clear to say there won't be funding from the ICS for bus services, but I've been clear to say that I won't say that there definitely will be either. Until we know the location, we can't work these out. One of the examples we gave at the town council meeting was my colleague Simon helped set some of these up in Crewe and Nantwich, and he used the example of the bus service that the CCG at the time set up. I believe they set the bus route up in response to the concerns around travel, and then 6 months in they actually stood it down because nobody was using it. I'm not saying that's going to be the case here, but we just don't know the public response, the public behaviour until we get further into the development. So there will be some really exciting things we can do about encouraging public transport, about encouraging personal transport, about the use of GP home visits, about online consultations. The answer is so much more complex than just simply, is it possible for Gareth to walk to Belvedere medical practice? There's a whole range of factors we need to take into account. But I would ask you to give us a chance to understand what the preferred site location is and then work with us on what answers they are. And until that point, you're absolutely right, Councillor. There have been real concerns about travel, and I understand that. I forget the lady's name who lived opposite Marden, and we had that interaction in the town council. No matter what happens to Marden medical practice, if it moves, that patient is going to have further to travel, and that's something we need to deal with. But I can't deal with that until we know what the site location is. I can see Councillor Halliday's keen to go.
Could I just have one quick follow? I won't go on as long as I did before. So in terms of this, the most important part of the decision making is the GP's decision on what they think is best for their patients and them, because that's what I heard back. And I guess what some of my concerns is that you can't untangle the fact that the GPs have quite a lot of financial interest in some of these decisions. And that's what I'm struggling with a little bit, that we're, where is the public who pay for the NHS? Where are they in this decision-making process?
So there's a range of factors that will determine which model goes forward. The primary factor was the availability of funding and for us to be able to secure the future of many practices as possible. But yeah, the GPs are independent businesses. They get to choose what they do with their businesses. We've made an offer around how we can develop those services and make them more secure and sustainable. We couldn't force GPs to come in. They'd make their own individual choices, but we've made an offer and 6 have come forward. And a range of factors will play into their decision making as to whether they wanted to or not. But I can't speak for each of them individually. The public representation in this is through this kind of forum. For me as an NHS manager, my responsibility is to make sure that NHS funding is deployed in a value for money way. That's the entire purpose of the consultation process as well. So the public interaction with that, the taxpayer interaction with that, is well mapped out through the process.
Thank you.
Right, so I must say that the Scrutiny Committee and the Joint Task has had many years of having documents given to us without all the background information, which makes scrutiny quite difficult. Mm-hmm. And one of my first reactions when I saw the slides was to email Tom and Rachel and say, okay, so where's the information behind all of this? Because if I'm going to do my job properly, and I don't live in Shrewsbury, I live in Shrewsbury, which is a long way away, and we have our own GP issues, then I need to be able to look at this, scrutinise and ask intelligent questions around it. And it wasn't until that point that actually the PID was available to me, and it was then difficult to find because it was the 4th button and wasn't necessarily something that would leap out at you. So having looked at that, there are all sorts of other questions that come into my head. But when I first looked at those slides, as a science teacher and so on, I would always look at a weighting of how things are weighted, how you score things when you go through the slides and so on. I have no evidence of how you've scored a site, how you've come to those conclusions. I have no evidence of how you've come to your option, apart from the fact that NHS England is telling you and you've got some money you can go to for that. So that gives a weighting in its own right, doesn't it? We've got money. we can go for the money. Let's try and make it fit. Rather than actually, this is what we want to do innovatively. How can that actually really provide for our residents who may or may not have a number of issues? So it's all that I found missing from the papers that we had, which was just a sideshow. That's a comment. But I am interested in how you weighted any of the decisions that I've seen in the PID. I'm also interested in whether it would still be economically viable if you only had 2 GP surgeries on site or 4 on site rather than the 6, and you did start off with 8. I was also interested, Kate, on why 2 had withdrawn, so I'm really interested in the answer to that if and when you've looked it up. I think there are some other issues. What is the upper limit on the funding? Because land prices, especially around the Otley Road, will be very high, and that could price you out. So what happens if your final option, where you've done all this work, finally the land price is far too expensive for you to develop? So there must be some upper limit to all of this, and there must be a minimum number of GP surgeries you need on site for it to work. I'm also interested in that, from the things I've asked around, because as I say, I don't live in Shrewsbury, many of the doctor's surgeries have pharmacies attached, near to them. So you go and get your prescription from, and I never have this benefit in Shropshire or across the border where my doctors are in Montgomery. You go into a pharmacy and you get your prescription. What will the impact on those pharmacies be if these 6 move and are all on another site somewhere else? Because I know, because my sister-in-law for many, many years was a pharmacist, that the majority of the money that a pharmacist makes is in scripts that come in. If suddenly people are not coming to them with their prescriptions, then their business model will be undermined. And we know that the NHS is now looking to pharmacies to give a lot of that upfront information so that people don't go to the GP. So I think there's a bigger picture here that we really need to look at, which is, are you going to destroy one leg of what's going on? And if you are trying desperately to provide lots of services on site, does that mean you're going to have a pharmacy on site, which then immediately will take the scripts away from everybody else? So it's a big question for me. I think it's a big part of the picture that I can't see any reference to that anywhere. And I also know that if you have an in-house pharmacy, which isn't an independent, then it means that local people can't go and buy many of the things they want to be able to buy over the counter somewhere else, because their local pharmacy can't make ends meet just out of that. And you have to then go to a supermarket or somewhere else to get exactly those things. And having a doctor's myself, where I can only go and buy, I can't go and buy anything apart from get my prescription. When I had small children, that was a significant issue, because if I needed Calpol, I then had to get in the car and drive 8 miles, which is what you're trying to stop. So it's part of the picture. I'm really interested to know what other services you think will be on site, because those are the things that will be important. But I agree, just because the doctor said you've got a bad knee, you need to go and see a physiotherapist, you won't necessarily get it at the same time, because I can do that at my doctor's surgery just over the border in Wales, but I still have to wait several months often for a physiotherapist to look at me. So I've done the waiting. The funding route I'm really concerned about, and the upper limits. I'm really interested to see a complete breakdown of criteria around that funding application and that bid, because that will actually drive your decision making. And so it's an extra weighting on what we're doing. High cost of land, pharmacy I've done. I also would like to know how you've worked with Shropshire Council And of course, there is other funding that Shropshire Council may or may not have, which is called SIL, and you spelt it wrong because it's C, not an S. But actually, there should be allocations around that because SIL is there to provide services for residents. So are you counting that into this bid, or is it completely separate? And if so, have you been given any idea how much you're likely to get? And my other concern is any site you come up with, if you've got all these other services on site, the parking is going to be a major issue. Not just, and I know you refer to it, but it is significant because you will be driving people into cars. And if you've got lots of other services there, you will have not only GPs seeing everyone, but you will have all these other services seeing everyone else and potentially a pharmacy as well. So all of those things are of real concern to me. It doesn't mean to say I'm absolutely against this. I'm just, what I wouldn't want is a pilot to be set up, spend a lot of money, and then for it to fail for a number of sensible reasons. I have the weighting and the transparency. I've been fascinated at the end of the whole thing, and I would like you to write this down to see what learning you've had from the whole procedure. And where does this fit with the Shrewsbury town plan and the local plan? Because all of these services are part of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kick. Again, I've got a long list of questions. If I don't get to cover everything, then please do remind me. So firstly, Councillor trying to use the phrase push back. I'm not here to push back. I'm here to really value a scrutiny process. So the things that we learn from this discussion will be really helpful for us to go forward, and it's very much taken in that tone. On the weighting, we can share that. That's not a problem at all. Most of the weighting for the scenarios, if you like, Cavell against the other ones, will binary, yes or no. So we can share those, no problem at all. They've been through the shareholder reference group. We'll make sure that all of that is shared with the stakeholder reference group and more broadly. So, great question. On the economically viable, it's quite a tricky thing to get that right because we're before the business cases. So what we're doing at the moment is trying to take those GP practices that wanted to go through this process, through the business case process, and ascertain whether that's economically viable or not. Part of that will be some of the factors that you've described. Part of that will be the funding that's available to us.
And the bit I didn't add into that is how does that actually affect those individual GPs' business cases? Because they have their own business models.
Yeah.
And how that interacts with this new business model will be a fundamental.
Yeah, and in many ways that's part of the process that we go through. Back to that point about engaging with citizens and the public really on, we're way ahead of that stage of thinking in terms of the detailed financial implications. That will come with what's called the outline business case and potentially final business case if we get to that stage. So all of that work needs to be done going forward. And if we've done that already, we'd quite legitimately say, well, hang on, this is a predetermined outcome, isn't it? So that is work that does absolutely need to be done, and we will share with you as we get to that where we can. In terms of why two have withdrawn, again, it kind of goes back to the conversation I was having with Councillor Halliday. There will be a range of factors. I'll speak to Charlotte, but with one of them and get a briefing on that. Can't read my writing now. I'll come back to that one. Impact on pharmacies. Back to my point about the value of the scrutiny. I think that's a really good question. I think there are a couple of practices where the pharmacies are not located with them, and I can therefore see that would be largely non-dependent, but some of the pharmacies are located. So I don't know the answer to that, and thank you for raising it. We'll go and work that through. On the learning review, every programme of this size has what's called a post-implementation review. As part of this programme of work, we will absolutely do that. And I'm going to instantly look left in terms of the Shrewsbury Town plan, and maybe wonder if you can pick that up while I get my brains around some of the other questions. That's okay.
Sorry, thank you for the question. So once planning applications are submitted, obviously that would be part of the planning policy that would be considered alongside that process. I'm not a planning expert, so I'm not going to give you the details of that, but that would all be considered as part of the planning process.
The planning process is different to the strategic plan for the town centre and the services provided across it, which should include schools, health.
So it would all be considered as part of that. And I think you asked about the SIL funding as well. I know that was a question that was raised at the town council. I need to check with Councillor Holiday, that we've got responses back across, but there was some specific questions asked around SIL funding. I'm not clear if it's being considered currently within the financial envelope, but it's, again, it would be looked at as part of once the site is known. There was some small amounts of funding. I think one of the questions was around London Road site, and there was some small amounts of SIL funding that have been allocated for a surgery, and I think that would be looked at as part of potential sites once they're known, is my understanding. But I'm not a planning expert, so I'm happy to take these questions away and get sort of full answers on them.
It's the planning policy and the local development, our local plan, and how it fits with the Shrewsbury Town Centre plan, which are all policy documents which then feed into planning, that I'm particularly interested in, because actually if this affects this part of Shrewsbury, then surely these same criteria affect many other parts of Shrewsbury, and it may well be something that we as a council need to look at.
This question for Eddie rather than anyone in this room.
Yes, but it's part of all of this.
Yeah,
And I think we've been really clear that a part of the process, and once sites are identified, that'll be part of the pre-application process and the application process, that you'd expect to consider all of that kind of wider policy.
Yes, but it's the policy that I'm concerned about, and any interaction that we've had with the formation of policy, that if we haven't done now, we need to for the future.
That gave me an opportunity to read my appalling handwriting. It was land pricing and whether that's a factor. Of course, it will be a factor, but that will be part of the business case process. So once we identify the preferred site based on all the technical criteria, one of them will be, is it affordable? And that will allow us to consider which site locations can be taken forward. So that would be part, and it's not a binary black and white. It's an iterative process for us to understand. Okay, that one may be affordable, and therefore we can make it work. That one may be even more affordable, and therefore that gives us different options as well. So that's part of the process that we will go through to understand how affordable it is. But if there's one that was free of charge, that makes it more preferable to one if it was highly valuable.
And is there an upper limit on your bid?
There isn't actually, no. So we started the process with an indicative value of around £40 million worth of investment. As we've developed this, I think we're significantly higher than that at the moment. The proposal that's on the table could potentially require as much as £60 million worth of investment. And at the moment, NHSE are comfortable with that level of investment. I'm sure there will be an upper cap, but it's not. There's not a limit that we've been given.
I presume you're not sharing that with those selling.
Say again, sorry?
Presumably you're not sharing that information with those selling.
Yeah, well, that's
sensitive.
Yeah, that's just the whole programme rather than just the sale aspect. I think that was all the questions. Okay, has that covered off the?
I think so, and my only other concern is the hard to reach groups that patients groups don't necessarily get to, because they're the ones that are very hard to reach and they're not involved in the patients groups.
Yeah. So we have 4 key priorities as part of the integrated care system. It's the reason why the integrated care system is set up. One of those 4 is to address health inequalities. Right at the heart of what we do as we plan these services has to be to ensure that people, regardless of background, have the same access to services, regardless of where they're coming from, based on however you determine that. So addressing health inequalities will be right at the heart of all the work that we do, and I will expect you to hold me to account for that.
How are you going to get to the hard to reach groups? That's my major question. How are you going to get to them? Because it's a difficult thing for the council to do, and it will be difficult for you as well. And it may be that your GP surgeries, well, they have a vested interest in this. We need an independent way of getting to those very people who don't have smartphones, are not digitally enabled in any way, who actually don't go out very often, but when they have a health crisis, actually it's really important and they need to do something about it urgently. How do you get to those? And those are the ones who are much more likely to be impacted by their GP surgery moving away, because they're silent until there's a crisis.
The crux of that will be what's called the integrated impact assessment. And I use that line not because it's a good defence mechanism to say we'll get to that, but right at the heart of the consultation document will have to be the integrated impact assessment that assures people going through the consultation process. We document, you'll get to look, touch, feel and challenge, that says we've done all that we can to make sure that this addresses the health inequalities within the proposal. It's there, it's a formal part of the process to make sure we do that, but it's right at the heart of the reason why we do our job as well. So that's the route forward.
We'll hold you to it.
I've asked you to and I would expect you to. Of course, sorry, Jackie would also like to add.
Just really to give you a bit more context as well. The consultation plan, it's a document, isn't it? And not everybody's, interested in reading. So it's really important that we reach out and we reach into those communities. So if you look at the impact assessment, it might say it could be around frail elderly, it could be long-term conditions, disability, age, could be a number of factors. What we want to make sure is that where are those cohorts of people? Because as you said, not everybody goes through. Oh, sorry. Not everybody goes through the doctor's door. Often the services will come in, and I think I've only joined an organisation this month, so forgive me, I haven't got the history that you all have. But I've been in the NHS basically all my adult life, so I know the system. What I would say is that the ICB has now started a really strong infrastructure. So when that listening exercise took place, it didn't exist. And what's being developed now is this stakeholder reference group that's got a huge demographically represented members of the public and elected members and patient groups. It's also now just developed an inclusion and equality committee. So every impact assessment has to go through that committee to be scrutinised, and that committee is there to say how are you engaging with the most vulnerable people, and if you're not doing it, come back to us because we've got to challenge you. And at the end, how did you do it and what did they say? So there are now stakes in the ground, and I think that's important for Scrutiny to know. So there's definitely that commitment to do more, and there's definitely that commitment that we will go out. This is not a test table exercise.
But you'll share that with us, will you?
Which the impact assessment?
Well, no, the consultation.
Of course, yes. But we've not begun to start writing it, and also when we had the last reference group, so there'd been 2, I asked people with the interest in being part of a readers group. It's really important that it translates. Sometimes you pick up NHS documents and it's, you're lost in science really, and so we've got to make sure that it resonates, and we provide them in different formats for people who've got sensory impairments and other forms of kind of restrictions to allow for intelligent consideration, and that we are transparent in that decision making, and they are the governing principles, and that's what public consultation is measured on in court. It's not engagement, it's a public consultation measurement in court. So we're only at the engagement bit now. We're going into public consultation, and we are committed to getting it right. And we want to work and learn from you, and we want you to help us get to your networks as well. Lots and lots of your staff, but also local patients. We're a big organisation. Lots of our staff are local patients. Because we work at an organisation doesn't stop us being and having a view. So it's also about working with other organisations to share that with their workforce, to share that with their service users. So it's not about a small team trying to do this on their own, because they absolutely can't. And we've also had the support, and I'm really pleased to work with Health Watch, really as a strong patient voice. And so Lynn and Barry, the other Health Watch Chief Executive, are part of the reference group.
Is that the same point then?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Thanks for that, Jackie. I think it's really important that Health Watch is part of this piece of work. What's been really interesting for me as the Chief Officer of Health Watch Shropshire is that over a period of time, we've had very few comments from the public about this hub, and I think it's partly because there hasn't been a huge amount of information for the public, so they don't know very much, so they don't know what they think about it, and they are not able to express their concerns. What I really want to do is work with the ICB on how we as Health Watch can be part of this further engagement and right up to that consultation period, because as an independent organisation, we have a duty to share publicly what people are saying to us. But because we haven't received very much, then we can't represent a view in any of those meetings. So, for example, in the last quarter, we had 1 positive comment, 1 negative, and 20 as the result of one of the council members encouraging their constituents to speak to us, and that is all. And so I find it really hard to be able to say what the issues are for people. Clearly there's issues around transport and access for people, but I'm not able to go into any further detail. So to be a really important member of those conversations, I really need everyone across the system to remind people of the role of Healthwatch as that independent organisation, and that the necessity to us of publicly reporting what people say to us. Because at the moment I don't have anything to report particularly.
Fair punch. Okay, thank you. Nick, finally got around to you.
Thank you. I'd be very grateful if we could just look in a little bit more detail at the recruitment and retention point that I think Kate raised. As I understand it, and I'm a complete layman, there is a national issue with recruitment and retention of GPs and other healthcare professionals. Now, I suspect you'll tell me that some of that is because of inadequate buildings and so on. But some of it's got nothing to do with buildings. It's to do with the GP contract and the fact that it pays GPs to retire, in my judgment, at a ridiculously young age. Because otherwise they get penalised by the tax system. Now, why does putting them in a new building solve that problem? With great respect, I can't see how it does. And if we have a lovely building, but you can't staff it properly, which I think is the point that Kate made, how does that help? Because I agree, I mean, access is access to the service. I mean, yeah, you've got to get there. I mean, I represent a relatively rural area, and very, very few people walk to the GP surgery. They all drive. But the problem is, can you get an appointment? And if you do get an appointment, will you actually see a GP? I haven't seen a GP personally for well over 2 years. I've had telephone calls, which is great up to a point, but you know, what can you see over a phone call? Not much. So the recruitment and retention point seems to me to be important. If the new hub is going to attract healthcare professionals, which hopefully it will, because it's a smart new building, it's exciting, etc., etc. What does that do to the services that are currently available in RSH or in PRH? Because presumably some of those staff might come out of clinics in the two hospitals or elsewhere. And if, like me, you represent an area where it's extraordinarily difficult to access some of those services anyway, are you looking at the impact? I mean, I quite get it. This is all about Shrewsbury, and I'm not complaining about that. But you know, our responsibility as a scrutiny committee is to look at Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin on a wider basis. Now, there's only a limited number of people, and if you're going to pull some of those into the new hub, isn't it going to make life even more difficult to recruit GPs into Heather's neck of the woods, or even my area is just north of Shrewsbury, and I would have thought, you know, if the new building's really attractive, well, it's going to make it even more difficult to get doctors in the surgery in Baschurch, even more difficult to get nursing staff, even more difficult to get pharmaceutical services dealt with. I mean, I'm not sure quite what your remit is, but I think our remit as a scrutiny committee, with respect, is to think, well, what impact is this going to have on the wider primary care network in Shropshire? So sorry, I'm just picking up on this sort of recruitment, but we're constantly bombarded by the BMA, by you know, all the other organisations that represent healthcare staff saying there's a national problem and a national shortage, and I can't see how the building solves that problem. So, sorry.
I think there's a number of really useful points there. And again, in that sense of scrutiny, there's some really interesting questions that we'll need to go and reflect on a little bit more detail. In terms of the recruitment and retention side of things, those are two different things, two different staff groups. The retention is a known factor. We are really clear that the GP practices affected are telling us that this is a route to them having a future that they would not otherwise have. So the retention side of our existing staff is a really positive aspect of this, and that is an element of judgment. But back to your point, Kate, about hard fact, I think that's about as close as we can get. Our GPs see this as a route to having a sustainable future for their practice. The recruitment is much more grey area. I totally recognise that. The ability to recruit new GPs or experienced GPs into Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin is complex and difficult and messy. And it's a dark art, quite frankly. And this will only be one component factor that can change that. I wish that there was a national political will to solve the pension issues and to pay more to all public sector staff, not just our doctors and nurses. But we are where we are, and the things that we can influence are the things that we can control. So our ability to make Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin more attractive to new staff or staff that are employed elsewhere, that's my responsibility. And therefore, this will allow us to potentially attract more staff. We're told that this is the future of the kind of employment market for people coming into GP practice, that they don't really want to have that burden of financial responsibilities for their business and their practice building. And therefore, this takes away one of those limiting factors. But can I tell you, as a result of that, I'm going to have 10 GPs knocking on the door to come and work here? No. But it does take away one of the limiting factors. But yes, actually, it's a point that I hadn't thought about. What will that mean for Bass Church? You know, I live on the way out to Bass Church, so I totally understand what you're saying. I'll be honest, I've thought about this from a perspective of my responsibility is to SDW, and therefore, if we can attract new GPs or GPs from elsewhere into our lovely county, into our lovely town, that would be brilliant. I hadn't really thought about, would there be other local GPs that might actually want to come and work in this hub instead? And I think that's something we've got to think through from on Councillor Barsley. I think it's a really good point that I haven't considered, and thank you for raising that. In terms of the other staff from RSH and PRH, it's a constant factor for us within the local health service. We're currently setting up a load of virtual wards, for example, as part of the urgent and emergency care challenges. And those can be quite attractive roles for nursing staff in the hospital. So we have to then manage our nurses. Where do we put them in the right place? And this could be the same issue. What's different about this, though, is we actually want more activity being carried out within the GP practice and taking activity out of the hospital, because our hospitals are constrained at the moment. Now, we've all seen the pressures the whole NHS is under, PRH and RSH in particular. So yes, I'm actually going to be looking to actively encourage to move services from the hospital sites, and with that will have to come staff, and we'll have to manage that really carefully. But I see that as an element of risk to it, but I actually see it as a much more positive step as well if we land it properly.
But I mean, just take one example, audiology. Audiology at the moment is operated entirely in Telford because they can't get the audiologists to staff both RSH and PRH. Now, I can jump in my car and go to PRH, that's fine, but you know, it's not that easy. And if audiology is something that you might put into the hub, even if it's once or twice a week, a clinic or something like that, and there's only limited numbers of audiologists in Shropshire, you're making it even more difficult for people who aren't served by the hub to get that service. Because you're not, I guess, going to allow people from other GP practices in Bass Church or whatever to come to the hub for these, or are you?
Oh, we absolutely would, yes. This would.
I see.
Yeah. This would absolutely be a co-location of the 6 GP services, and then the provision of primary care services for anybody that it would benefit from accessing them. It wouldn't be ring fenced for just those 6 GP practices at all. So, but
well, with respect, let's go add even more to you. transport problems, isn't it? Coming in
Potentially, but
all over shops, isn't it?
But what we need to do is work through, and it'll be part of the consultation and involvement process. Let me be really clear about that. So it'll be part of the engagement process. Will be around what services would benefit from being located within this building, and what impact will that have for our patients. Some will be really positive choices that will help. Some would go, actually, that doesn't make sense, and therefore we won't do it that way. And that's part of the process that we'll go through with citizens as well. It won't just be for the NHS team to do. But that's work we need to get to. But we will work it through with patients and with yourselves as well.
Okay, thank you. I've got one question from the back from Councillor Buckley.
Hi, my name's Julia Buckley. I'm the leader of the Labour Group and I represent Bridge North. So just briefly, we have a lovely new building in Bridge North. We don't quite have enough doctors and we don't have enough parking, but we have a lovely bus stop. And I drive my mum to the GP hub in Sunderland to have her eye clinic. So just a bit of background about that impact. I was going to ask the same question as Councillor Kidd, but backwards. Representing a rural area and living in a village all my life, we grew up with a branch surgery with its own pharmacy. And in Bridgenorth, we've got our new lovely building, but we've got a huge village coming to be built at the top in Tasley. And what the residents would love, and we're trying to work with the surgery, what they would love would be a branch surgery with its own pharmacy to cross-subsidise. In other words, a small, tiny little available unit, and that the pharmacy subsidise that cost by bringing the income in, but it makes it available for some of those low-grade services which older people would prefer to have locally. So my question, before the kid asked it, would be the opposite. Have you included negotiations with pharmacies, with those GP hubs, as part of the hybrid model, which was one of your 4 or 5 options? Could that be one of your hybrid models? That yes, you have more GPs moved into the hub in the centre, but that you retain smaller branch surgeries in some of those locations which have their own pharmacy, which then subsidises and gives them that sustainable income. So that's my question to you. And then my last little point is, I spent many years working with the Green Book Treasury for some of my projects that I had to run. And as you know, you must include not only economic value, but social value. And you must talk about the social value of your proposals, and you must put an economic price on them. So I hope for the 45,000 residents who will now have to make a journey to a new hub, that you will put an economic cost on the social value of them having to do that, and you factor it into your costs. And like Councillor Kidd, when we see the details, I want to see that detail in there, because that is what the Green Book measures. Thank you.
Would you forgive me? I'm going to have to look this way as I answer you. Okay, so sorry. So yes, I think both of those are really excellent points. So for the first one around what's left in the, I was going to say that was left behind, but better language is what's left in the kind of residual locations. And I think we need to work out where the current or the preferred location will be, and what we therefore need to choose to do to help mitigate the access. Sorry, I'm still looking at the access issues. So let's work through that process and let us be clear about that. On the second point around the Green Book, absolutely, completely agree. Been through that multiple times. There's an economic evaluation against that. The social criteria will be the costs attached, as you say, but there will also be some benefits attached. We will go through that process, and that will be, as you say, through the standard business case process with all of the information included within there, all the analysis included within there that you would expect to see.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kate, quick question.
Yeah, it will be quick, and also a question to you, Chair, as well. I suppose it's a comment as much as anything around the recruitment, and I am kind of interested. Concerned within the case for change that one of the reasons that this is being put forward is that it unlocks the liability of estates from GPs. Now, as far as I'm aware, that's not something that is being pushed for nationally. And I mean, certainly the Royal College of GPs says scrapping the partnership model, this is a direct quote, is certainly not the solution to the pressures facing general practice, improving patient access or meeting the government's target to build the workforce. So, and the partnership model, i.e. is the traditional model where GPs run their own businesses and own their own practices. Also, the information you've given about other people accessing surgery services in the hub is new to me. Up until now, I thought that the additional 2 practices who pulled out would have access to these surgeries. So that's new information, and it kind of brings in another point around climate. Shropshire Council have declared a climate emergency. And so, and also I know for a fact that the highways team were planning to make that road much more family friendly, Otley Road, that is, because there's a lot of young families moving into that area. And so I think it probably needs to include, really good look at the I know that will be part of it, but, the climate, the factor of climate and all these additional journeys. It just feels like you've got the money and you're going to make this fit no matter what, and you're not thinking about the wider recruitment issues that have been raised. You're not thinking about pharmacy. It's tunnel vision. We're going to have this, and you're not. I mean, this is part of scrutiny process, but you really need to look at some of the other issues and plans that are in place. And my question, Chair, just so I don't have to put my hand up again, is I put a question to Cabinet, and I was asked to bring it here. I'm not sure whether it's correct. I mean, maybe it would bring it here for discussion. I'm not sure I can go back to Cabinet if needs be, but my question was, will Shropshire Council investigate the legality of the engagement exercise to date in accordance with the Dunning principles? So is that something that this committee, I was asked to bring it to this committee, or is that something that needs to go back to Cabinet, having discussed it here?
I'm tempted to say yes, go back to Cabinet, but let me get some legal advice on it, because I honestly don't know the answer, which and where it goes, to be honest, but I've only heard about it this morning, so I'll come back to you, Kate, on that one. That's right.
If I could, Kate, your question came before Cabinet. Unfortunately, you weren't there. An answer was provided for you. Have you not had a copy of the answer?
Yeah, I was asked to bring it to this meeting.
Well, I mean, you can obviously, if you've been asked to bring it to this meeting, you can either bring it to this meeting or you can bring it back to Cabinet. It's probably more appropriate to bring it here. Sorry, Chairman.
Yeah, I said I need to speak to the legal team and see what's involved. So happy to pick it up, but I'll come back to you with an answer.
Can I ask my little one?
As long as it's very little, Heather.
I don't know whether this is working. Many years ago, my village had 2 outreach surgeries because the doctors moved away. They were removed because the doctors' surgeries found they were uneconomic. A point around what you're suggesting and answering. It will be up to the GP surgeries in the Cavill Centre whether they do that or not, and whether it's economic for them or not, and isn't really anything you can consider. I ask, really.
I think that's a really valid point. This is all part of, because we are working with individual practices and businesses, this is all to work with GP partnerships to try and get the best model. That model will evolve over time. No question.
It will. It's just that if it's one of those things that's then offered that actually we might have an outreach in some form, and actually it's only there for 12 months. It's no good to anybody, and actually might be something that sells the whole idea to some residents who, particularly for many older people, move into a town, they move so they're close to a doctor's surgery and they can easily walk there, and that may be the selling point. And if it's then down to a GP surgery to then remove it after a very short period of time, then that whole plank has been removed.
What we will do is we'll be really clear as we go through the consultation process about the hub structure, the services that are co-located, the GP practices that are co-located, and what may remain behind. But I'm just, again, very conscious of language in the public domain. There's no commitment to make sure that there will be services that will remain behind, or not ruling it out. What we need to do is understand the location, what that means for our GP services, and what we may therefore leave as legacy, if in fact we do. But again, that needs to be based on what option we take forward into consultation, and will be really clearly set out within a consultation.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gareth and Jackie, for firstly turning up and sharing the information with that. That's a great starting point, and I'm really pleased. I think the committee reflects that having a look at things again and going over it all again is a step forward. There's been a number of questions raised here today, which I hope will be considered going into that engagement piece. It's clear that not everything's been thought of, which is always a positive in my eyes. So it's plenty to work on. So now the new engagement process is going forward, and this committee is part of that. Hopefully that ongoing dialogue can be part of that going forward. So it'd be really useful. So thank you for your time, and much appreciated.
Can we leave you to it, or
you're happy to stay for the rest of the meeting if you want, but I'm sure you've got more important things to do.
If you'll excuse us,
Thank
thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Item 8 is the programme, and just as I'm just going to turn to Tom for an update on that, and he's got a low battery running on his. Tom,
I'll do it without looking at the battery.
you're going to wing it.
Sorry, I'm looking at the battery sign. So, in terms of the work programme, so the next meeting of this committee is the 21st of November. So on that agenda at present, the two items which we've got coming forward are I think the report, it should be the report of the task force group which has been looking at ambulance response times, but actually it needs a different title to that. It's actually looking more widely across the whole of the system and looking at the learning we can pull from other areas, other locations, and seeing what can come forward. It's going to come through this committee then on its way to the Joint Health Overview Scrutiny Committee as I think that meeting on the 29th of November. And the other item, and I have had, I'll be speaking to the relevant assistant director later on, looks like it's going to be around the adult social care reforms, but particularly looking at the market position statement in relation to adult social care, which is timely, I think, at the moment because of the situation as we're seeing around cost of living and the other things which are impacting on that wider care sector as well. So those are the main items coming up for the committee at this point, and that should be the last meeting of this committee, I think, before Christmas. Heather?
This is something I raised a couple of months ago, but it's now becoming really important, especially around step-down beds and so on. We had Bishop's got the Shropcom come and do a presentation to us. This is really not moving on, and there are a number of other really alarming facts that are now, and they are now out in the community, which are affecting certainly Ludlow Hospital and recruitment and retention of Bishop's Castle, which really are very concerning, and I do think this committee now needs to quite urgently look at. And it isn't just about our two hospitals, it's about the whole of Shropcom and how they might be run in the future. Because there's planning and so on, I've been made aware, going on in the background for service delivery for those hospitals. On top of that, we have staff sitting having cups of coffee in Ludlow Hospital and having their coffee with NHS England, who are measuring up the building and looking at the value of the building for future disposal. And this is not the maternity block, this is the main hospital. That does not mean that any of those staff working there feel secure and they begin to look for other jobs. So I would really like Shropcom to come and make some sort of presentation to us before we get to the stage of the Shrewsbury Cavill hub, because this will affect us across the board. It affects adult social care and step-down beds. It affects very rural areas and the delivery of services to those rural areas, whether it's in Whitchurch, Bridgenorth, Ludlow or Bishop's Castle. So we need to be aware of these things, and before we get to the stage of them saying, oh, actually, we're going to sell Ludlow Hospital, or actually, Bishop's Castle's never really going to open properly, because we do not know what they are going to do with any of those. And we will get to the position where a decision has been made and then they'll consult, and it's too late. So I really want them to come and tell us how they think they're going to be running any of our hospitals across Shropshire, our community hospitals, and it needs to be done more urgently. I've been told there may well be a plan available in January. Scrutiny needs to know that before they start consulting on what they've decided. Please.
We don't say Shropshire. I think we need something about Oswestry and North Shropshire.
And this is the whole lot. This is the whole of Shropshire.
I'm talking about. Jill, a comment from you.
Yeah, very much to endorse Heather's comment. I've personally heard in the last 10 days from two informal but very reliable and knowledgeable sources of major threats to all of our community hospitals. That is a massive issue for rural Shropshire, north and south, in terms of access to healthcare. It's an issue for the whole of Shropshire in terms of additional pressure on urgent and emergency care if those local beds are lost. And of course, it's a big climate issue if people are having to drive from rural Shropshire to Shrewsbury or Telford to access routine care. Major threat. Staff are already voting with their feet and looking for other jobs, and in some cases getting other jobs because they believe they don't have a secure future. I've been tremendously impressed by today's meeting. What I've heard today is the Scrutiny Committee giving really brilliant scrutiny to a very important issue. I very much hope that the same diligence will be applied in the timely way that Heather is suggesting before we let those threats to rural healthcare gallop ahead of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, on a related topic, wonder if I can ask what Shropshire Council is doing to implement the hospital discharge and community support guidance, which was published on the 31st of March of this year and which was intended to be implemented immediately. And this document is quite wide-ranging and covers all the comments that have been made and all the questions that have been asked on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Tom, Rachel.
I suppose without wanting to get ahead of the report from the Task and Finish group, the Task and Finish group had a meeting with the director of, well, we call it People Services, but Adult Social Care, Children's Social Care at the council, and the assistant director a couple of weeks ago, I think now. So it will be a feature within that report, certainly, that focus on what's happening with discharge and the wider focus, but it also ties into, I think, the concerns Heather's raised around step-down beds as well. It's become clear in the work of that Task and Finish group just how complex and integrated that entire system or ecosystem is that needs to be taken into account. And I'm sure even when that Task and Finish group report comes forward, there will be knock-on further pieces of focus and work which will come from that.
But yes, absolutely. But this bit, we really need to be holding into account quickly. I'm also concerned about minor injuries, which many of these hospitals have. And if the hospitals are downgraded, minor injuries will then put more pressure onto SAC. So we need to look at their whole future and some sort of vision that Shropcon may or may not have.
I'd just like to endorse the urgency of this. that this task and finished group, I'm sure it will report, but can we have an indication of when?
About 3 weeks' time, I think.
Yeah, it is. No.
Thank you, and hopefully it will cover how far the Shropshire Council and the integrated care system have implemented the guidance which was published in March of this year.
Councillor Chair, Chair of the Health, the Task and Business Group, we're not involved in, so.
Chair,
We're waiting.
I've got one quick question before. Does this committee wait until we have the legal advice from Shropshire Council itself before members go to the press and ask for a legal review and everything? Or do we wait, or do we just carry on as we are?
I can start this. I think that there's a question for you as a committee, as the members, about whether or not you would support or would want to pursue that legal advice, or looking at the legality of the engagement so far. I say the engagement so far because what's clear is from today is what's happened so far is not the end game, and there's more to come. And then, if I recall properly, what's in the note from Cabinet so far in relation to this, there's then the question about how that legal advice would be funded or be taken forward. So there are two questions there which need to be considered as the council's health overview scrutiny committee here. That's why the questions come back to this group here about whether or not you want to pursue it. There is then that next question about how that would be funded.
Yeah, I think that was the response from the cabinet question, was very much to bring it to this committee to get your view on whether the committee wanted to put forward a motion around pursuing legal advice, put forward that would support that, given the feedback to the question today. What does the committee feel on that? And then the second part of the question is looking at the funding.
Yeah, but I think my point was as well that if the committee is a scrutiny committee, that we shouldn't be shooting off in different directions, saying we're asking for a legal review or whatever, until we have the legal advice back from Shropshire Council.
We asked for the legal advice from Shropshire Council.
I think what we'll do, we'll take this away and discuss with colleagues in our own legal team to see what our situation is. I mean, I'm happy to take a straw poll around the table to see what the feeling is. My own view is that you had a lot of information there, that this is evolving as we speak, and probably now is the wrong time to put a challenge. If we're going to challenge it, now is the wrong time to do it, because there's a lot of re-engagement being done. That's my own personal opinion. But I would, if you want to take a vote on it, we'll take a vote on it and just gauge opinion around the table now. But then I need to take legal opinion from our own internal counsel and speak to the chief executive, etc. If you're going to put a legal challenge in, who's going to fund it?
Can I ask a question about this then? One, I need to know a bit more detail about actually what the legal challenge would involve. But the other thing is, if we hang on, will it be too late? I know that usually judicial reviews, you need, there's a 6-week window in which you can actually do that from a decision point, and I'm not sure where we've got to with the decision point, and have we outrun any of those? It's those questions.
What's in my head, I don't know where we are and what the question is, so I don't think we can suddenly say yes, we're going for a judicial review when it's.
The Whitehall surgery closed because there was insufficient time for a judicial review in Shrewsbury.
So my question.
It's an example.
Which decision are we going to question, and when was it made? Because if it's too late, then it's too late. So that's my question. And then we need to vote on getting legal advice or whatever. But I need to know that we're not out of it. It's pointless voting on it if we're out of time.
Well, that is actually my point. Why ask for a judicial review if you know that you can't do it until you've had the legal advice?
David was first.
Yes. You'll be able to hear me anyway. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think my view certainly has altered this morning as time has gone through. I think when we first heard about this issue in the beginning of the year, and there had been no consultation or meaningful consultation at all. We are now in a very different place following today than we were then, and I think it's probably a little bit premature. I certainly would be happy if you just took it away, came back to us. We've got another meeting in 3 weeks' time. Let us know at that meeting what the feeling is. But my view at the moment is that we shouldn't be pursuing that, because the reality is no decisions have yet been made. But we're not even at the start of the period when the formal consultation will start to run. So we can hardly have a review of a decision that doesn't exist.
Precisely. Kate.
Yeah, just to be clear, so the question wasn't to ask for a judicial review. Councillor Bentinck has given that opinion, but the question that I was asked to bring here was to look at the legality of it up to this point, and raise a number of issues about, I think, a lot of the statements that have been made in the documentation so far have been influential, or certainly not evidence-based, and I think there are a number of things that have changed as time's gone on. So I feel that if we could get a feeling for that at this stage, rather than having to kind of go to full judicial review, we couldn't do that now anyway. That would be able to guide us on whether we went to that stage once the consultation began.
I think some of what David's just put forward, Jamie, is that there's a lot of new information coming forward, and they're also re-evaluating everything. Whatever getting legal counsel would cost, I think it'd be still be premature, whether it's JR or getting legal counsel advice. The cost is going to be quite steep when you haven't got the money to do it. I think it's pressing that button at the right time, isn't it? Well, I'll certainly take that away and discuss with colleagues.
With a view to hopefully coming back
at
a later stage. Yeah, thank you.
Chairman, I think there's just the danger, quite apart from the fact that, David Menry's point that, what is the decision? I hope it's been a very productive meeting this morning. And I think, in fairness to Gareth Robinson, points were raised that actually I don't think he really thought about.
Right.
If we've raised questions so that they now go away and think about the impact on the pharmaceutical services, for example, or the point I made about the impact on rural communities all over Shropshire, and what impact might the hub had in pulling people in there so that the rural communities are even more find it even more difficult. I mean, I don't think he really thought about that, and slightly worrying that they hadn't thought about it. But I think that process hopefully will engender some genuine new thinking on the part of those running the process. I hope so. And maybe this is something we need to come back to, but the fundamental point is, what is the decision that's being challenged? And I can't quite see. I mean, they will just say, well, the decision hasn't been made.
Well, I'd just say the decision that was made was to proceed with the project initiation document before making adequate consultation or engagement about alternatives. There are 6 funding models which the NHS currently supports, one of which is a Cavell hub. And so the integrated care system has not considered these other options and just simply brought forward a Cavell hub as a one-horse project. And so I think that the gunning principles have not been used in formulating this, and that's the basis of the judicial review.
Okay, we'll take that point on board, but as I said before, no decision has been made yet. We've heard that today in clear terms. It's all being re-evaluated, so we won't be taking any immediate action. But I will take legal advice and come back to this committee at the next meeting on Kate's point. That's okay. And with that, we're past the 12 o'clock mark, so I shall close the meeting and say thank you very much for now, and we'll see you at the end of the month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.